Chapter 11, Section 1, and kind of the big idea here is that a democratic society requires active participation of its citizens. Once more, my sales pitch that this class is designed to promote active participation of American citizens in the electorate. We need that as a people to survive. So, a few things that we're going to look at. We'll talk about public opinion, mass media, interest groups, how to gauge public opinion through polling, and then finally what you can do as a summer job is maybe be a pollster, someone who gathers this type of information for a living. So, should politicians be able to ignore public opinion and do what they think is best for the country? This is a question that we always face as part of a republic. Since we elect people to represent us, instead of voting for every decision ourselves, they do retain the right to vote against the interest of the people who elected them. And so first off, thinking about public opinion, what does that even mean? You know, it's the ideas and attitudes that most people hold. It can be difficult to gauge, and people do this as a full-time job, do nothing but try to gauge what the public opinion on a various issue is. And knowing what the public opinion is actually a vital part of our democracy. So, public opinion means the ideas and attitudes that most people hold about elected officials, about candidates, our government, or even political issues. You know, for example, one study claimed that 97% of Americans support some type of background check for the purchase of a firearm. And that's a form of public opinion. That is something that pollsters, professionals who gather information about public opinion have determined that this is something that the American people want. It is an extremely important part of our democracy. What the people want is a way that lawmakers gauge what they should do. Now, our president is the only person who has to be elected by the nation as a whole. And in order for them to get things done, they need the support of the American people. They also need the support of Congress to get anything done. So if everyone hates the president, then they are unlikely to get much accomplished during their tenure. And so lots of money is spent to gauge what the public want. This helps presidents time their decisions. You know, for example, laws regulating the use of assault weapons have been a part of the national discussion for decades. But perhaps the recent crises have made the time favorable to moving these discussions forward. And so timing is a big deal in terms of public opinion. How do we find out this information? First off, we have to think about who are answering these questions. And so if you ever do get called by a pollster, which you very well might, then they're going to first ask you about your background. How old are you? Are you male or female? How much money do you make? What race do you identify as? What religion, if any, do you practice? What do you do for a living? Where do you live? And all of these questions might feel very personal, and they are. But they are necessary for figuring out who you are and why you're answering these questions in the way that you are. Because what pollsters have found is that who you are says a lot about how you will answer political questions. Another source of important public opinion is mass media. Mass media is a mechanism of mass communication. This includes everything from TV to newspapers to magazines to the internet to the movies to books to audio. Anything that is designed to reach a large audience can be lumped into mass media. Public officials are also a source of public opinion. They do this for a living. You know, one thing that these representatives are hoping to achieve by coming and talking to you guys is they really do want to find out how you feel about certain issues. They really do. It might or might not affect their decisions, but part of their job is figuring out who you are and what you want. And then lastly, interest groups. Interest groups are very important, and they are a part of our lives as citizens. You may find an interest group that is working for something that you like. You know, there is an interest group devoted to lobbying on the behalf of those who ride motorcycles. There's an interest group for gamers. There's an interest group for folks who love to read. There's an interest group for most everything you can think of. And these interest groups are people who share common points of view about issues, and they unite to promote those beliefs. Because here's the reality. If you go to Raleigh and you stand outside the governor's mansion and you knock on his door and you say, "Governor Cooper, I'd like to see this law changed." Well, he's going to look from his balcony or on the security cameras and he's going to see you out there. He's just going to call security and you'll have to leave. You know, that's not how you get things done. You don't just march up to the door by yourself and say, "Change this law or else." I mean, that's considered assault, or at the very least trespassing. If you want to get things done, you need to get a lot of other people involved. And that's where we can get things done. Okay, so what types of public opinion do we see? What can come as a result of how people feel about a certain issue? Number one, this can change the direction of a political movement. So let's say that the movement is leading us to implement self-driving vehicles. Let's say we're headed that direction, which we probably are, right? Maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, self-driving vehicles will be available for consumer purchase. Well, let's say they go crazy and start driving into buildings and running over pedestrians, and before you know it, there's just this crazy mass killing of robot cars, and it becomes unsafe to step outside your home. I'm assuming that's going to move public opinion away from self-driving cars, right? It wouldn't take too many cars running over pedestrians to move public opinion away from that.
The cars developed a mind of their own.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, the robot apocalypse. Here we go. So direction of public opinion, certainly. Even the intensity of public opinion, you know, that's something we try to gauge. Okay, people want this. Well, to what degree do they want this? Are they, you know, storming the palaces with pitchforks, or are they filling out surveys on Facebook? You know, to what degree are people angry about this certain thing? And then finally, stability. You know, we need to know, is this public opinion a fad, or is it going to be around for a while? Is this what the people really want? And we have to gauge that from a large number of people, because after all, we are fickle. To mass media, you know, the question is, how much influence does this have? And that can sometimes be a difficult question to gauge. How much, to what degree are we influenced by the media that we consume? So the next part is, how do we figure this out? How do we figure out what you guys want? Well, the simplest way is with a poll. With a small group, I can just talk to you. And I can figure out, you know, do you guys hate this way of doing things? Would you prefer a different way? And we can gauge that very easily in a small group. But in a large group, well, surveys are probably the most effective way. And so that's where we wind up with public opinion polls. And a public opinion poll is really just a survey. in which individuals are asked to answer questions about a particular issue or person. And I can tell you how a poll is written has a big influence on how those questions will be answered. You know, for example, if you were asked the question, you hate this person, right? Right? That's going to influence you to answer that question in a certain way versus how do you feel about this question, yes or no? Secondly, election results are perhaps the most accurate public opinion poll there is. Because after all, these polls, and pollsters do this for a living, they really try to gauge opinion by surveying people of different backgrounds. But they're still only dealing with a small group of people. And election results, at least, are the largest group of people that we're likely to get to answer any kind of questions on a given subject. And then finally, a pollster. A pollster is someone who does this for a living. Let's say you decide to study psychology or you go into political science. One of the easiest jobs to get in those fields are creating surveys and collecting them. It's not glamorous, but it's a necessary part of a functioning democracy, is to figure out what the heck you guys want. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we collect information? Well, first off, we can't just only ask white people. We can't, because there are certain things that white people are going to say that other minority groups might not. So we've got to ask people of all different backgrounds and races. This is called a random sample. Random sample. Because after all, if we just ask white males between 18 and 23, well, that's going to give us a very limited set of answers. So random sampling. Secondly, a well-constructed sample needs to represent the entire population. We've got to have men, we've got to have women, we've got to have people who identify as transgender, we've got to have anything you can think of. We've got to have people of different races, of different backgrounds, of religions, etc. And again, that would lead to, in theory, a well-constructed sample. And then finally, we've got to word these questions very carefully, because once more, if you say, you hate this idea, right? That's going to lead the questioner. We can't do that. We have to ask very open-ended, very carefully constructed questions. And then finally, the opposite of that is a push poll. You hate this idea, right? That's called a push poll. Is a survey designed to elicit a certain response. So, now, there are arguments for and against polling. Number one, polling allows office holders to keep in touch with citizens' ideas. So our representatives, Congressman Meadows and General Assembly Congressman Henson, want to meet everyone they represent. They would love to have the time to be able to have a personal conversation with every one of you, but they just simply don't. There's not enough time in the day for them to meet every one of their constituents throughout their term. They can meet many of them, and they really have to do that as part of their job, but they also have to figure out what you guys want. And one way to do this is polling. Now, the idea is that it is meant to make officials more concerned with what you guys want. But it can also backfire. It can wind up making officials more concerned with what you guys want than actually making decisions for your benefit. Because sometimes we don't always want the smart thing. And that's why we elect professionals to sometimes make important decisions for us. So critics of polls worry that these types of things can distort elections. For example, you guys raised a legitimate concern when we were talking about presidential elections, that you may not want to vote for the third party candidate because they don't have a chance of winning, ergo it's a wasted vote. Well, you're basing that information off of polls. You know, polls suggest that Gary Johnson would only win 1% of the popular vote. So nobody's going to show up and vote for him. So critics do worry that polls can harm the political process. They also worry that they can affect voter turnout. You know, what if you thought that Hillary Clinton's election as president was a foregone conclusion based on polls? All the polls suggested that she was going to win. And so what if you just said, I'm not going to bother. It's already a foregone conclusion. So I'm not going to bother voting. And what if enough people did that to sway the results? So in that case, polls affected possibly the outcome of a national election. And that's obviously a concern about polls. If they suggest something is inevitable, then we will not get involved as a result. So, of course, the question about push polls is controversial because some people do want to use push polls to manipulate results.